Welcome to the last episode of 2024 of Extra Time with Girls on the Ball. Plenty of upsets in the final weekend of the WSL, and the UWCL group stages are finito. Let's get into it. I'm Rachel.
I'm Sophie.
And this is Extra Time with Girls on the Ball. Welcome back. This is our final episode of the year and we are doing it separately. I'm in Dublin, Sophie is in England, and we're going to have, because it's Friday and it's not come out Monday, we had a manic Monday, didn't we, Soph?
We did.
A lot of things going on and it made it really difficult to get this in, edited out, and we were away on the
it was mainly my fault, to be honest. I
didn't want to totally blame you.
Different things at the same time, so yeah.
It was Sophie's fault. But yeah, so we're going to try and we'll have a quick look back at the games, not super in depth, because unless you're living under a rock, you pretty much know what happened. And we'll kind of wrap it into a bit of a broader overview of the season so far for each club. Maybe a bit of a report card sentence or two to summarize how we think they did. But we are going to go into a bit more in depth tomorrow on Instagram Live. So join us over there for that. We'll kind of touch on how managers are doing, what players have stood out, maybe some of the games that we enjoyed this year as well, including January to bloody August, because there was still football going on then. So that'll be a little bit more in depth. And of course, you send across your questions so we can try and answer them as well. And that will be a bit more detailed. But Soph, I think maybe we might share our team of the half season then, rather than today.
Yeah, because I haven't done it yet.
Well, that, and we can talk through it then with some of our viewers, which would be fun. But equally, I would still like you to think about a player of the week, and then also like a tactical piece or a tweak or something that stood out for you across this week. And that can include the Champions League as well. I'll give you a little bit of leeway. So just you can have a think about that now, get that thinking cap on. Right, for the final time this year, the Barclays WSL results are as follows. Leicester 1, Chelsea 1, Goodwin and captain the goals. Brighton 1, Spurs 1, England and Olasslagers with the goals. Everton 2, Manchester City 1, Hope, Hayashi and Fowler with the goals. Aston Villa 3, West Ham 1, Leon with the brace, Daly and Asai scoring. Palace 0, Manchester United 1, Grace Clinton with the only goal there. And Liverpool 0, Arsenal 1, Alessia Russo getting the goal. That feels like ages ago. So for the last time in 2024, the Barclays WSL table looks like this. Chelsea remain on top on 28 points. Manchester City slipped to 6 points behind the league leaders. They're on 22. Arsenal are on third on 21 points. United below them also on 21 points, but an inferior goal difference, only just. Brighton are in fifth on 17 points. And then there is a 6-point gap to sixth placed Spurs. Down the bottom, Palace are now solo on 5 points. Leicester are above them on 6, with West Ham in 10th on 8 points. Then we've got 3 teams above, Everton, Liverpool and Villa on 9 points. So still just 4 points between 7th and the bottom of the table. Things could have been so different with a win for Spurs or West Ham or Man City. We could be talking about gaps closing at the top or opening at the bottom. So it's interesting how these results have finished. Are you maybe a bit surprised at the gap at the top at the end of like this time of the year?
You mean at Chelsea's gap?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, sort of. I think we've seen how they've been playing over the last 5 months, and they've not always been superb or brilliant or the best that they can be, but we've talked about this so much. It's a mentality that they've managed to get themselves over the line so many times, even in the games when they're not at their best. I know they didn't quite do it on Saturday, but other than that, it's kind of been that's got them over, as well as the quality that they have on the pitch. So they've shown like parts of really, really good football about what Sonia Bonpastor wants to do with her side and how that's been building on in. And I do think it's quite amazing how when we started the season, we were all talking about, will Chelsea be in transition, or will there be a bit of a stuttery start because they're getting used to a new manager? They've just got rid of Emma Hayes, who's been there for a decade. And that's always tough. You saw it happen with Man United in the men's game, right, when Alex Ferguson left after all that time. But I think she's hit the ground running. It's not perfect. It's far from perfect. And she'll admit that herself. But I think they've got the job done. So I'm not surprised in that sense. I do think we maybe don't question Manchester City enough at times. And I think it's shown in the last 2 weeks kind of the lack of cover that they prepared for Bunny Shaw and Lauren Hemp. And I know you can't, it's really unlucky that you have those two and then Viv out at the same time. But I do think there's been a real reluctance to build a deep squad. And they have enough they do have enough players, strong players to make 14 players, but then you're starting to bring in the academies when a couple of those get injured or something. So it gets to be a problem.
Yeah, so I'm just going to flag now that I am at home and it will be loud. There will be interruptions, unfortunately. I will do my best. Okay, I was going to just briefly ask about whether you were surprised at the top, because I was then going to ask you about the bottom. And now I feel like you've said how you feel Chelsea have done before we've gotten to the Chelsea-Leicester bit.
No, I can add more. Don't worry.
Okay, well, for me, I'm surprised at this half of the season for someone to be so far ahead. And equally, we're not used to seeing such a close bottom half. That's also quite new. So it does make things a little bit different and a bit exciting compared to other seasons we've had, where sometimes you're like, right, they're nailed on at the bottom, or it's a close race at the top. So that's been interesting. With this Leicester-Chelsea game, of course, to see Chelsea slip up towards the end of the first half of the season is maybe not a surprise when there's so many fixtures, and we kind of thought that's when you get really, really, really tested, and it can make some games more difficult. And I think that's what we saw. Conversely, I think this was one of Leicester's most disciplined performances that we have seen, and of course they have struggled with injuries this season, particularly in the number 9. We've talked about that. So I thought that was their kind of different styles. Chelsea maybe not having their best performance, Leicester having one of their best performances. So for Chelsea, I feel like you've got to give them, I don't know if we're going to grade them, but you've got to give them an A, maybe not an A star or an A plus as we call it, but an A, because they've been almost perfect in terms of the results they're getting, despite not being absolutely perfect on the pitch, which is what I think champions are made of. Leicester, difficult one to grade. You're basically got a student here who's had some stuff going on outside of school and have, missed a few days due to things that aren't in, their control. So it's difficult to really judge them harshly, but equally could and should be doing better, I guess, in terms of picking up points. So what would you grade Leicester?
Oof, that's hard. Maybe a C. Is that too harsh?
Could we say, if we're doing Irish grading system, a C plus maybe?
C plus. And I don't, as you say, I don't think it's necessarily an indictment on Omandi Miguel and her kind of managership. I think she's had it so tough in this first couple of months of the season, a couple of months in charge of a job. And I think that what I've been really impressed with is their defensive foundation. I don't think that comes about very easily. And the fact that they do have a solidity to their backline. Yes, they've not been getting results, but at least they've been defending well. And they have the 5th meanest defence in the league going into the Christmas break, which is really important. I think something to build on. And you saw that at the weekend, their kind of defensive performance. It's that attack. And I think the problem is that the injuries to a number 9 has meant she's trying to wing it a bit in terms of who she puts up there up front. The wingers that she has don't do as well in that 9 position. They're much more effective on the sides. She's also had, Hannah Kane's come back from an ACL injury partway through the first half of the season. So she's not yet at her peak. You've had Deanne Rose, who's, continuing injury issues. Well, they continue. She got injured in the game against Chelsea. Shannon O'Brien has just come back from injury as well, from a long time out. It's not like pretty much only Missy Goodwin, I think, has been the winger who's stayed fit. So it's not like across the board she's had a lot of, forwards to choose from. She's having to kind of pick and choose in all areas. But that number 9 position is a one that they're going to have to look at over the winter, I think, whether it's temporary or whether it's permanent in terms of whether they go for a loan or not.
Yeah, they're definitely a team who needs to utilise the January transfer window.
Yeah.
So essentially Chelsea, I guess, open the door a bit for Manchester City to try and claw back some points and get just a little bit closer. And Manchester City chose that weekend to have the biggest slip up they've had in a long time against Everton, who had never beaten them. And I feel like this is quite a similar game where we saw Everton having one of their best performances and Manchester City perhaps having one of their least good performances, if you like, arguably with the injury woes and key injuries in that team, as everyone knows: Alex Greenwood, Lauren Hemp, Bunny Shaw, Viv Miedema. But equally, Everton are plagued by injuries. And this is something I kind of touched on up front, where I was like, it's almost that Everton have more experience dealing with injuries and then Manchester City do, and they kind of know what to do in those situations a bit more. And I
don't want to be like overly harsh on Manchester City, because for any team where you take the spine out of a team, when you take out Alex Greenwood, when you take out Bunny Shaw and Lauren Hemp, you have a problem, and any team will find it hard to adjust. But I do think, and I think maybe more, I probably undersold them there. They probably have, a good 16, 17 world-class players in that squad. But I think when you look at Chelsea, who have their own significant injury issues, and we maybe blur over that a little bit because they've already, they've got the depth. They can field two pretty much strong starting 11s. They've built up that depth over the last few years. And there has been a bit of a reluctance, it seems, from Taylor to think beyond the starting 11 in terms of people. What will happen if Bunny Shaw gets injured? And yes, people say Viv Miedemar is out and she would have been the replacement. But I'm not so sure at times that would have been a perfect, fit either, because they are so, everything they do is dictated to the way Bunny Shaw plays, and they have that plan A. They don't have a plan B. And he said it to you about, well, plan A can work and then you're fine. But actually in football, and we've seen it with Sonia Bonpastor, getting in a plan A, B and C is really important to get sometimes you can't win in the way that you want to win football. It's just the way it is. And sometimes you have, as Everton showed, you have to kind of forget about your principles a bit and do what needs to be done. And Everton is a prime example of that. They gave up their kind of possession-based football to sit behind the ball, block low and then hit them on the counter-attack, and they did it perfectly.
Now, the one thing is I do appreciate when managers say we don't want to change our principles when we're playing another team because of another team. I understand that, but I think when you've had such key injuries, you can't keep playing the way you were before, that almost kind of leaned on Bunny Shaw, Lauren Hemp. They were your key outlets. You can't try and keep playing like that when they're not there. So you do have to be able to be flexible when your team requires it, as opposed to in response to whoever you're playing. But I think when it comes to grading them, Everton, how would you score them without being too kind of blurred by that result? But you have to say they're one of the few teams in that half of the table that have taken points off Arsenal and points off City.
B-.
Oh, that's quite fair. That's, yeah.
If we're giving Leicester a C+, then I think Everton are above Leicester in kind of, they've drawn with Arsenal. They beat Liverpool, and they've beaten Manchester City, I think. B-.
Okay, fair enough. And Manchester City.
Wait, the best news for Everton, Christmas present for all of Everton's fans and the whole team. The sale of the team's gone through, I think, today. Or yesterday. So that is going to be a huge weight off. There'll be hopefully money to come in. There'll be hopefully be a real big buzz around the side, because it's been years of absolute kind of trauma for the Everton fans in terms of what they've not had available to them. And when you talk about progress, you can't progress if you have no resources or no money. And Brian's really been having to stretch what he has to make the best of it. And hopefully, touch wood, these new owners come in and they open up a few pockets, a bit of money for Everton to be able to go out in the new year and buy a couple of players. They bought one today as well.
Yeah. Okay, Manchester City.
Ooh.
Can I just also point out, just in case my microphone is picking up Delphine, the dog's not being killed, right? She's fine. She's absolutely fine. She just likens herself to a wolf, and every now and then, if she sees any kind of movement in the garden, she loses her mind. And I do think there's someone in the garden. So that is what the sound is. She's not dying. She's fine. She's just a little bit of a house devil,
drama queen,
and a drama queen. Anyway,
yeah.
Or for Manchester City.
Manchester City. Shall we go A-?
Yeah, okay.
If we're giving Chelsea an A, they're not as good as Chelsea. So
I'd nearly say B+, but
B+.
yeah, I just
A-.
think
I'm going A-.
Okay, I'll let you do that. That's fine. Improvement could be made next year. Let's put it that way. And again, another team that both teams I think could really benefit from that January transfer window. I'm intrigued. Quite a few teams who could potentially bolster. So
there's so many injuries around. Like when you look at it, when we're talking about it, Chelsea, Manchester City, Leicester, Everton, Brighton as well, Liverpool, they've all got really, and especially the ones in the lower half of the table, they've all got really thin squads, more so than Manchester City and Chelsea. So I think it might be a busy window.
Okay, let's have some takeaways from Aston Villa versus West Ham. I think they've obviously got new manager in, a temporary manager in Sean Goater, with Robert DePau leaving the club in quite slightly unusual circumstances in terms of how he has handled that situation, and has certainly let his mouth get the better of him, which hasn't been a great look. But yeah, a bit of an awkward exit, I think. But they got the win under Sean. Actually played some nice football. It was a nice game of football to watch. In terms of how both teams were performing, I think West Ham performed pretty well as well. I feel like they're coming together at the end of this period. And I thought if West Ham won that game, they would be the ones wishing the Christmas break wasn't coming, because they were getting that momentum. But I do feel like West Ham are starting to click. Pavi's looking really good. You've got some new players in who are finding their feet. And then with Villa, I feel like they're finding themselves again a little bit, and they're doing things that maybe they weren't doing in the past under Robert DePaul. We've got players back in that weren't getting starts, Leon and Daly being key to that win. So, you know, had there been another couple of games for both of those teams, it would have been really interesting to see where they got to, because they seemed to be improving. But yeah, I guess scoring wise, I think Aston Villa have been a little bit disappointing in terms of playing some all right football, but just not getting results. And West Ham similarly starting to improve and play a style of football that you could see, but not always finishing the games off. So they've kind of been a bit like, again, could do better.
You know what this is like? You know, on TikTok, when you like, they do like is it the blind ranking of like Taylor Swift songs?
Yes.
Or like players in the WSL. And you get a really like all right player early on, and you put them way too high, and then suddenly you've got Sam Kerr in the bottom because you've suddenly put, this is a bit like that.
So come on, I need to get some. I feel like both of these teams maybe are a kind of a C level.
C, yeah, I'd say C. If we gave Leicester a C plus, I think we have to give them both a C plus.
You both a C plus, okay? Because I don't think Villa or West Ham have had the same sort of issues that Leicester have had, which is why you tacked on a plus, I think.
Well, they've got different kind of issues, right? Maybe not West Ham so much, but certainly Aston Villa have had a coaching issue, and that's quite clear. So
true, but when they're playing decent football and the players aren't finishing off the chances, that's an issue. That, you know, that's not like, that's an issue that.
But then they're playing decent football.
Yeah, but it's an issue they can deal with it's in their hands and they're not dealing with. Whereas an injury crisis is not really something you can control. So maybe it feels weird to put them as a C rather than a C plus, but I think a C is fairer than a C plus personally.
I'm going to
harsher grader.
Maybe you are.
You would be a much nicer teacher, to be fair.
Would I?
Right, guys, you tell us what you would be grading. Maybe we're being too nice. I don't know. Maybe we don't want to be savage and give someone like a D. But okay. Well,
it's a bit like how you always say with Scotty. I'm the fun mum, and you're the serious mum.
And I'm like
the serious mum.
The serious mom that looks after the serious issues and stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Let's swiftly move on to Palace 0, Man United 1. They got the win. That's the main thing for United, but perhaps a bit of an example of what their season has been like, in that it's not been super impressive and convincing. But, you know, when they were getting a lot of stick at the beginning of the season, they were unbeaten, essentially. But perhaps just doesn't feel like issues that have been there before are necessarily being addressed. And as well, Palace showing that they're in games. They're in touching distance. They don't look out of place. And I think it's kind of an example, again, of where both of those seasons are at, is that they look like they belong in the WSL. They've got a bit of work to do. And the same at Manchester United. They're winning, but is it convincing enough? It's that kind of vibe.
This might be harsh, but is a B too harsh?
For who?
Manchester United.
No, I think that's okay.
But it seems harsh because they've only lost one game and they are fourth and they're tied on points. But I just think we all expect so much more from them. And while they have the meanest defence in the league, that's pretty cool. I do think in terms of their attack, it's been a bit all over the place, and in terms of rotation. And I do think like that game against Palace, yes, they were in control of it, but maybe they got a bit lucky with their goal in terms of the mistake from the goalkeeper. And there was that same one against Everton, and both Everton and Palace had their chances as well to equalise. So, yeah, maybe a B, but I feel I'm being harsh.
I think what people have to remember when you're listening to this is that we're not grading them in comparison to other teams. We're grading them in the context of themselves as a team.
Okay. So well, I need to
kind of saying Chelsea are better, so Chelsea are this, or in comparison to Chelsea, Man United are this. We're saying, you know, what you expect from Manchester United at the beginning of the season with the squad they have, or the context that they might have, whether it's Everton with the injuries, you know, you got to take all of that into context. So we're grading them based on their performance as a team and what they're achieving. We're not going to say Palace is a D or E or fail because they're bottom of the table. We're going to look at Palace in the context of you're a team.
You needed to tell me the rules before we start.
I think that's why I think the scoring is fair, because we're not if we were scoring them based on other teams, we'd just go A, B, C, D, E, like from top to bottom. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now when talking about Palace, I would probably give them a C, because I appreciate they're bottom of the table, but I just feel like I've been so impressed with the way in which they've come into the league, the way that they've learned quickly in games. They've not been, other than that Chelsea game, they've not really been absolutely battered by a team. They never really look like a team that don't belong, and I think have overperformed at times. Even if they haven't got the result, they've played some really nice football and played better than you would have expected them to play. So am I being too nice giving them a C?
C+.
You give them a C+?
I don't know. This scoring system is annoying me.
No, but I think it's the kind of thing that if you said at the beginning of the season that, okay, granted they're only on 5 points, but, they've
outperformed what I thought they would.
Yeah. And that's what I'm thinking of, right? Like, you got to think about where you think they would have been. And if I told you Everton were going to lose this player, this player, this player, where do you think they pick up the points? So it's kind of in that wider context. And I think you have to praise the performances and the way they've played in games and the way they've improved over the time. But listen, our listeners are probably telling us we're just being far too nice. I'm all right with that. I'd rather be nice.
Or too harsh. We'll be both.
Or too much. Depends who you're asking. Depends which fans are listening. Of which team. Okay, finally we had Liverpool 0, Arsenal 1. Russo again scoring goals. She's in flying form. And yes, she absolutely needs a break, but I bet she's like, got this rhythm now. This is the worst time.
I think both her and Leah Williamson will be really annoyed that the breaks come when it's come. I know they both will feel like they need a break, like mentally and physically, but in terms of their form, they've been outstanding in this last 11 games or so. They've really come into their own, come into their form, and it'll be really annoying for them that they have to disrupt that. In the last week, Russo scored something like 5 goals or something over the last 10 days. It's pretty incredible in terms of the scoring rates, given that she is a very good goal scorer, but never has been that goal scorer that will score a ton of goals. So, I think that's annoying for them.
And then Liverpool, obviously another team struggling with a lot of injuries. But we have talked about the decision to spend the money on Olivia Smith, a great young player that you feel over the next couple of seasons is really going to come into her own, but isn't necessarily a player that was going to start banging in loads of goals from the get-go. And then they got the injuries. And suddenly you're like, okay, you're going to look back at that decision to spend that money and perhaps not have gotten in a few more. Now, I think they will definitely be getting players in, or at least on loan during the...
They won't.
You don't think they will?
Matt Beard said there's no money. Matt Beard said there's no money. So he said they might get one in. I mean, they might go for the loan, but
the break will hopefully allow them to get some players.
I think that's the really disappointing thing with Liverpool, and that's stuff beyond Matt Beard's control. And I think Tom Gary wrote an article about it in The Guardian today, about the club not stepping up to add support in terms of financial stuff. They've done a lot of good things, but in terms of building on last year, and they had a really good season last year. And yes, it's always the way that a team has a really good season and maybe performs less well the next season. It just seems to be the nature of the league. But at the same time, when your club isn't really putting up money, which they have, or being prepared to spend more each season, and it's not like it's tons and tons of money that you're looking for. It's a little bit to make it incremental to be able to close the gap on the rest, right? And you don't have that problem at Chelsea. They go out and they spend money, and Sonia in her press conference after the Champions League was basically like, we're going to look at what we need and we're going to get it. It's kind of that kind of vibe. Whereas for Liverpool, with Matt Beard saying twice in 2 press conferences that he has no money to spend, basically, or only very little money to spend, that's a worry, because Liverpool Football Club have money. They should be able to resource their women's team and add a few more players, because their squad is so thin.
So what are we scoring Liverpool? Because I've disappointing season so far.
Yeah, C.
Yeah, because there have been games that they've been in at the beginning of the season before the injury issues that they were winning and then not finishing out. And that's the disappointment.
And I know there's a context to it with the injuries, but I also don't think they've been playing that well.
At the beginning of the season, there were games they should have won and they didn't, or they were in lead and they lost the lead. So, yeah. And then conversely, Arsenal, I appreciate they've gone on this great run since Renee came in, but they were not doing well at the beginning of the season. And that come into their scoring, if you like.
It does. I was thinking about this while we were talking earlier. I was thinking, well, obviously in the first 5 games of the season, was it 5 games or something like that? You'd probably put them at a
D.
No, that's too harsh, Rachel. Probably at a B-, I think. I mean, they were still, but I think now you have to go to maybe in this last run of games been so incredible. And I know that they
factor in the beginning as well.
Yeah.
I know you want to give them an A- and I want to give them a B+.
I'll go B+.
Okay. Arsenal fans will probably come at us for that, but
just remember that in my heart I want to give them an A-. I'm just agreeing.
Yeah, but also they were the same players not playing well at the beginning of the season. So it's not something out of their control, if you like. So you do have to factor that into. Well,
it's quite clearly a manager issue again.
It was, but when you're in the box, why aren't you scoring goals?
But it's still but I think it's a lot of it is down to the manager, and you can see what Renee's legacy has changed. I do think maybe it's just because it's been such a remarkable turnaround, and I know people will say, well, they've not really played a top 4 team in that time. What? Yeah. I mean, in terms of the league, they'll say, well, they're only beating teams, 5th place and lower, and it's not really a test of them. But actually, I was having this conversation the other day. They weren't doing that before. These were the teams that they weren't beating. Yeah. They weren't beating your kind of Aston Villas, Evertons of the world. And to go and beat Aston Villa 4-0, I know Aston Villa had their own problems, but at the same time, Arsenal under Jonas weren't doing that. So that's a real sign that things have changed. And yes, it's not Renee's fault that she hasn't come up against a Chelsea or a City yet. That comes in January. That's going to be super exciting to see what happens. But she's addressing
the issues, and the issues where they weren't scoring goals. They were
Arsenal always played pretty well against the big teams. They always managed to get results. It was always those lower down teams where they tripped up. So the fact that she's turned that around, and then I think with the Champions League, that awful game that we started off with the Champions League when we were away in Munich, and the whole mood of the place was just so absolutely dire. And then you think now about that result on Wednesday night, you were there, the atmosphere in the crowd, the singing of her name, the fact that all of the players are thriving, they look like they're having fun out there. I just think it's been a quite remarkable turnaround. That's why I go A-.
Okay, fine. All right. That's kind of our scorecard vibes. We will go into, I think, a bit more detail tomorrow about players and memories and just the wider year, I think. But for you, the last week, it can include the Champions League as well. Give me a player that stood out for you. I think I know who you might choose.
Do you now? I don't think you do.
Well, now that you've said that, no, maybe not. Go on.
I'm going to be interested to see. Can I add in a manager of the week as well?
Okay.
So the player of the week, I'm going to give to Ruby Mace.
Oh, okay. No, I wasn't expecting that.
What were you expecting?
Kiara Keating.
Oh, yes. Well, that was a stunning performance, but her distribution was great.
Very good Barcelona.
But yeah, no, Ruby Mace against Chelsea I thought was brilliant. And I said it before when she played against Arsenal earlier in the season. I think this game time is doing her absolute wonders. And she is developing, and she's just had her first England cap. But I think her game against Chelsea, she was everywhere. She was protecting that back four with her life, and she was getting in challenges. She was covering where the gaps were. She wasn't allowing Chelsea into the box very often, obviously in combination with her defence. But I thought the work rate that she put in was amazing. Yeah, Ruby Mace.
Okay, you want to point out a manager too?
Well, I'm going to sing Renee Slegger's praises once again, because I really do.
When the final whistle went.
Sorry, I did. Yes, it was very sweet.
Like for instance, his arm. It was very, it was sweet.
But I think Arsenal now have to, and I saw Tim write this, and I wrote it on Twitter after the game, that they have to now give her to at least the summer. Yeah. I think she's proven that she's come in, she's turned things around. She's got a really good vibe around the place. Everyone really wants her to stay. You can tell the players want to stay. You can tell that the fans want to stay, and that's like half the battle, right? Maybe you don't have the confidence yet that she's a long-term prospect, but like, why rock the boat at Christmas when they've done so well? They've got a big start to next year. They've got Chelsea in January, I think City soon after. A big FA Cup game as well. I know it's against Bristol City, but it's the FA Cup and anything can happen. So why rock the boat right now?
Okay. And then a tactical thing or a tweak or a setup, I actually have one.
Okay, I'll give you mine and then you give yours.
We often talk about Gareth Taylor's rigidity, and he's reluctant often to change things up. And I want to recognise that he did in the second half against Everton. He did change shape to try and address the issues, and they did look more effective going forward and created more chances. And I think that was impressive to actually roll the dice like that. I feel like it was a bit too late at that stage to get back into it, especially when Everton can be so organised. But I wanted to tip my hat to that.
I want to give to two, but it's the same vibes, really. It's obviously Leicester and Everton. I think Leicester defended so well, and they proved exactly why they're the fifth meanest defence in the league. They worked so hard for each other, and they took Chelsea by surprise with the goal as well. The run from, I think it was Takarada that drew Ashley Lawrence and I think Millie Bright out of the way to allow Missy Goodwin to be completely unmarked to go into the box to score that. Was key, but I think their defensive performance, how organised they were, how they were willing to play for each other and defend with their lives, and it would be really tiring being without the ball for that long. Chelsea were coming at them in waves in that second half, and they were sitting deeper and deeper, and you're just getting more worried for them. But they put in, the energy and the performance that was needed. And I think the same for Everton. I think what I said before, giving up their kind of possession-based principles, really sticking to the game plan and producing it to kind of perfection. Yes, the penalty was a blip, but really they did it so well, and they limited Manchester City in front of goal more than you would think. So, and then they could have been 4 up in the first half with the counter-attacking, get more clinical in front of goal, and you're 4-0 up in it, you're away with the fairies. So it's all good.
I think as well, recognising that Leicester and Everton scored all their goals from open play, which was really well, because they've really been struggling with that. Okay, we're going to quickly run through the Barclays Championship because it has kept up its wildness all the way to the end of the year. Newcastle Blackburn was postponed. Bristol 5, Durham 0, Birmingham 0, Charlton 0, London City Lionesses 3, Southampton 1, Sunderland 2, Portsmouth 2. It does mean Birmingham end the year on the top of the league on 20 points. Bristol are in second, also on 20 points. London City Lionesses are in third on 19 points, as are Durham in fourth. Then we've got Sunderland on 17, and then we've got Southampton, Newcastle and Charlton all on 15 points. So there's 5 points between 8th and 1st, which is crazy. Down the bottom then, Portsmouth are on 2 points, but they're in touching distance of Sheffield, who are on 4 points. So that's important for them, to get another draw and pick up points and just keep themselves at distance and not be completely out of sight. Champions League, of course, concluded as well. The group stages concluded. We had Chelsea 2, Real Madrid 1. Man City lost 3-0 to Barcelona, which is somewhat expected going away and having such a depleted squad. And shout out to Chiara Keating. She made 15 saves?
Yeah. Incredible game.
Yeah. Arsenal then beat Bayern Munich 3-2. That was an exciting game that went ahead, came back, Bayern went ahead. Arsenal came back into it, scored. It was an exciting game. The weather was atrocious, absolutely atrocious, but it was a great game, particularly given how they played when they played them first at the beginning of the season. We also had the Euros draw. Now, we're not going to go into super detail about that because we did do an Instagram live of us watching the draw. So if you want to go back and watch that, that was a lot of fun. But I will say, we told you, Wales and England were going to get drawn together, and they did.
It was always going to happen. It was inevitable.
So that's pretty funny.
I think with the Euro draw now, reflecting it, it's a tough group for England, tougher group for Wales. But at the same time, there's so much unpredictability there. England haven't been great at times this year. Neither have the Netherlands and neither have France. France have dropped out of the top 10 for the first time in a long time. Netherlands just got back into it, so they're 10th in the world at the moment. I I think when people look at it like instinctively, you go, that's going to be absolutely incredibly tough, and how can England get out of it? And I think we've got to remember that actually on any given day, any of those teams, those three teams can beat each other. I think for England, actually the best thing is, well, it could be the best thing or it could be the worst thing playing Wales last. You would like to think they've got the job done in time for the last game, and so nothing's riding on that. But you could also say it like maybe should have been, in England's point of view, the first game. That might have been easier because Wales will be in that first major tournament vibe. It's a bit scary. Maybe they won't be quite up to speed yet, whereas 3 games in they might be a bit more up to speed, and we know the Welsh are going to give it absolutely everything. So you could look at it 2 ways, but I'm less worried about it than I initially was, and I don't know if that's me just being ridiculous or because I know that I'm not saying we're definitely getting through. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that it's not as like ominous as maybe it once would have been if we got.
Also, there's not a lot of the other groups are difficult. I think other than Group A, they're all pretty tricky. And there's some really interesting fixtures. Germany coming up against Poland, Sweden coming up against Denmark. You've got Belgium, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and
Portugal.
And then Group A is a hard one to call because actually not the most difficult group. Iceland, Finland, Norway, and Switzerland. So for Switzerland as the hosts, that's probably their best group to be in if they want to try and get out of the group, which is going to be difficult.
And Norway as well. Norway have a really nice route if they can play their cards right.
Just some quick orders of business. Any other business? I wanted to say shout out Jordan Nobbs, 200th WSL appearance. She's literally in a league of her own now. Poppy Pattinson also had her 100th WSL appearance. We now have the Subway Cup as opposed to the Conti Cup. You will always be the Conti Cup to me. Which saw Chelsea draw Durham, Tottenham, West Ham, United versus City, Manchester Derby, and Brighton versus Arsenal. And they were kind of a tasty little draw there for us to look forward to. But otherwise, that is it from us for 2024. Thank you so much for listening this season. There's so much more to come in 2025, so make sure you come along for the ride with us. And whether you celebrate Christmas or not, enjoy the winter break. Hopefully you can relax and spend some time with loved ones. Don't forget, if you're around, join us tomorrow. I'll say tomorrow morning around 11 o'clock or so, live on Instagram, and we'll have a bit more of a chat more broadly about the year and reflect on some of the most enjoyable games, the best performances, etc. But send in questions if you have any. Otherwise, we will see you in 2025.